Just 1 second, please.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Okay, apologies for that delay. Member Lopez is absent today. Member Perello
Here.
and Chair Flynn.
Here.
Thank you, Chair. We have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Wednesday, April 8th.
Thank you very much. And could we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Be seated, please. Okay. Very first item on the agenda is item B, which is public comments on items not on the agenda. Madam City Clerk, we don't have speaker cards. Is that correct?
Correct, Mayor.
Okay, so we'll move beyond item B. We'll go to item C, the consent agenda. This item 1 is under the City Clerk's Department. It's the approval of the minutes.
I recommend approval.
And second? Roll call, please.
Member Perello.
Yes.
Chair Flynn.
Aye.
The motion carries 2-0.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go quickly to item D, which is on page 2 of the agenda under reports. City Manager Department. Subject: City of Oxnard Environmental Resources Division Cash Handling Report. Recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee recommends that the City Council receive and file the Internal Auditor Report on the Environmental Resources Division Cash Handling. And we'll start with the City Manager. Mr. City Manager, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Committee. Actually, we're going to hand it right over to our internal auditor, Price, Page and Company. Henry?
Sorry about that. I had my microphone on mute. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, City Manager. And good morning, Mayor Flynn. Good morning, Councilmember Perello, and everyone else who is joining us virtually. My name is Henry Ohm, and I'm one of the partners at Price, Page and Company. We function as the internal auditors for the City of Oxnard. I'm also joined here by Usman Ilyas, who is also a manager at our firm. We're here to present the results of the environmental cash handling audit of the Environmental Resources Division. And I wanted to provide some background on this specific audit. Back in 2018, if you could remember, we conducted what is called a citywide risk assessment, where we met with a number of department heads and directors and talk about different areas within the department that are subject to risk, right? As internal auditors, we're always concerned about risk. And so as part of that whole process, we identified that the Environmental Resources Cash Handling Division maintains, retains, and handles a significant amount of cash on an annual basis. So anytime you have cash, there's always a higher risk. So this was identified as part of that risk assessment process. It was added to our work plan and was approved by both at the time, the Fiscal Policy Task Force, which is now the Finance and Governance Committee, as well as City Council. We conducted that audit back in 2019, and we completed that process towards the end of 2019. And because of required protocols, we weren't able to present it until now. And so I'll turn it over to Usman Ilyas, who's an audit manager here with our firm. He was instrumental as a part of this entire process. So he'll share the results, the objectives, our findings, the recommendations, and the result of the cash handling audit for the Environmental Resource Division. Okay?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, members of the Finance and Governance Committee. Is it possible for me to share my screen with this presentation? Or Michelle, could you go down the slides? Could we do that?
So, yeah, if you could just let me know when you need to go to the next slide, I'll control it. Thanks.
Yeah, so, yeah, sure. Basically, as Henry mentioned, we conducted a citywide risk assessment to determine which were the riskier areas during that we needed to focus on. Cash handling was actually identified.
Could you, excuse me, could you speak towards your microphone, please?
Sure.
That's much better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Okay. So as Henry mentioned that, cash handling was determined to be a high risk item during our risk assessment. That's why we focused on the cash handling procedures. And also based upon our experience, I think when we met with city personnel, this was elevated as a high risk audit. That is why we focused on this. As you can see, I think ER division handles around 2.4 million in cash handling annually. So that's why we focused on this audit. Could you go to the next slide? Going over the audit objectives, there were basically two main audit objectives of this audit. The first one was to see if the potential non-compliance with cash handling policies and procedures may lead to opportunities of misappropriation of cash. Essentially, in easier terms, it's to say that whether the ER department is in actual compliance with its own cash handling policies and procedures. And the second goal was to examine the department's control related to cash handling. And basically what that means is whether their cash handling procedures were designed and also working effectively. Next slide, please. Just to make something clear that our procedures weren't specifically designed to catch fraud, but those procedures actually require us to identify system vulnerabilities and expanded audit procedures. However, if during our procedures we came across any misappropriation of cash or any impropriety, we would bring it upon the city's management. Next slide. So coming to the scope of the audit, we reviewed all transactions, or we selected transactions from July 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2018, which is a 30-month period. And for that period, we reviewed ER divisions, cash handling procedures, and test of compliance with internal policies and procedures over their cash handling, their recording, and their monitoring. So it was a 30-month period, and the total population was about 165,000 transactions, which totaled to about a net revenue about 4.2 million, which is 3.4 collected in cash, 2.4 collected in credit card sales, and 1.6 is actually cash that went out because the buyback center actually gives cash out, which leads to a revenue of about 4.2 million. So just to recap, we looked at 30 months and about 165,000 transactions was the total population. Next slide, please. So now coming to the audit procedures, we started this audit by first conducting a tour of the ER resource division's facilities, and we interviewed management from their director to the admin techs that are in the staff to get an understanding of what are the procedures that are in place. And once we got an understanding of after talking to them, after visiting the plant on site, we conducted detailed walkthroughs that highlighted what are the procedures actually in place, and we actually documented those procedures. After getting an understanding and after performing the walkthroughs, we selected 250 sample selections for detailed compliance and control testing. And the specific slides that we're going to go through are specific to the 250 selections that we selected. So go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to go over the next, I think, 3 slides that kind of highlight what the level of detail we went to as far as the 250 selections that we selected. First, there are a total of 8 procedures. And once we go down, we'll see that there's a slide that summarizes everything for everybody. But I wanted to go through these so that you can just give some background information about what some of the procedures were. So we reviewed weight tickets issued by the scalehouse operator for each selected transactions. We confirmed that all weight tickets were supported by appropriate documentation. Just for everybody's knowledge, a wait ticket is basically a ticket, a system-generated ticket that is issued by the system once the transaction is initiated. Second procedure is we reviewed and confirmed that a municipal solid waste, which is called an MSW disposal ticket, was issued by the scale house operator in accordance with the ER division policies and procedures. Just again, for everybody's knowledge, an MSW ticket is a manual ticket that is issued by the scale house operator as a backup for the electronic ticket. Now, this is part of the procedures manual that the ER division is following. And actually, we have a recommendation regarding this as well, because we found that there were some inconsistencies regarding the use of this. Next slide, please. Now, steps between 3, 4, and 5, and 6, they primarily deal with how information comes in from the scale house operator into the ER division. So for number 3, we reviewed cash reconciliation sheets submitted by the scale house operator for each selected day. We confirmed cash reconciliation sheets submitted by the operator were verified by the admin tech. Now, the admin tech is a person that works within the ER division that is responsible for, verifying and recounting the cash that is brought into the ER division. Then for number 4, we reviewed and compared the cash amount listed on the deposit by detail report generated by the admin tech to the cash reconciliation submitted by each scale house operator. Next slide. So we reviewed and compared cash amounts listed on the daily main cash reconciliation to the cash reconciliation submitted by the each scale house operator. And number 6 is we reviewed and compared the amount listed on the daily deposit sheets generated by the admin tech to the sum of the cash and credit card totals on the cash reconciliation from each scale house operator. Next slide, please. Steps 7 and 8, they basically deal with how information is actually sent from the ER department to the treasurer's office. So for that, we reviewed and compared the cash amount listed on the consignment log to the cash amount listed on the deposit summary. Now, this is something that the deposit summary is something the admin tech prepares and gives it to Garda, which is then taken to the treasurer's office. So number 8, we confirmed cash collections were picked up by the security company Garda within a reasonable amount of time, which is about 3 days. Next slide. So basically, the next 2 slides basically kind of highlights our results. And then we have a summary slide that kind of shows everything, so that'll become more clearer. Just to go through these, procedure 1, there were no exceptions. Like all selected transactions had supporting wait tickets. So every transaction had a system-generated ticket, which is good. Procedure 2 is something I wanted to come back to. I had mentioned about the MSW ticket, which is a manual ticket. This is actually based upon our interview with management as well as our procedures. We noted that this is a manual ticket that the scale house operator is supposed to use in case there's like a power failure or there's a break in the system. So we noticed that that in about 49 instances there was no MSW tickets available. Now we couldn't substantiate if they didn't issue it or they weren't there. So we weren't able to review them. And we have a recommendation as well for this procedure. Procedure number 3, we noted that 13 instances in which cash reconciliations were not available for us to review. Procedure 4, we noted that a total of 6 instances in which the deposit by detail report was not available. Procedure 5, we noted that a total of 2 instances in which the daily cash reconciliation report was not available for us to review. Next slide, please. Procedure 6. This is, in this one, we noted that 113 out of the 250 in which the daily deposit sheet did not match the sum of cash and credit card totals on one or more cash reconciliations. This is also addressed in our recommendations. This is primarily due to the timing differences because things aren't being reconciled on a timely basis or as regularly as they should be. So we will address that in our recommendations as well. For procedure number 7, we noted 2 instances in which the daily summary did not match the cash listed on the consignment log. And the ones that we saw in total had a difference of $21. I mean, not a big concern, but based upon what we saw, there were slight differences. And I think procedure 8 was, I think we noted as well, was a big part of our procedures. We said that there were 3 instances in which time elapsed from the time cash was logged by the ER department and was picked up by Garda. There were 3 instances in which they were more than 3 days. So if you could go to the next slide. So in this slide, we've summarized all the procedures and what are the results. And I guess 2 things we wanted to kind of say. Obviously, one thing I mentioned was that the MSW ticket, we had the higher exceptions there. Then from 2 to 5, you can see that a lot of the items, there were some of them were missing. We weren't able to review them. So collectively, I think we may have made a recommendation that the policies should be to maintain the documents, and then the other exceptions relating to number 6, where there is a timing difference, we will address in the coming recommendations. So if you could move to the next slide. So these are all the recommendations that we made. We've already discussed it with the city management, and the ER division's management, and they've also provided a response, and you can kind of take a look at that as well. I think I've already mentioned this, that the ER division is using the MSW ticket inconsistently. When we spoke to the director, and we read through their policies and procedures manual, this is supposed to be a big part of their procedures. So I think once this was communicated to them, they assured us that they would be using it on a consistent basis. So the whole thing with this is to be used as a backup in case there is a breakdown, or there is another mechanism. It creates an audit trail just in case if there is any sort of problems. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, this again was obviously a big one. We saw that currently there is a time lag between when cash is counted and dropped off by the scalehouse operator to when it is reconciled by the admin tech. We recommend that the ER division have set schedules of when cash will be reviewed and reconciled in a timely manner. This is also related to one of the other recommendations that we're making. While we were going through this, we did ask the staff why this is not done, and a lot of the feedback that we got was that there is a shortage of staff within the ER department, and they are either working at full capacity, so there is no way they can reconcile items ideally on a daily basis. But there was that feedback that we did receive from the division itself, that they are trying to do the best they can, which I think they are. It was just that a lot of transactions come in a day, and to reconcile everything as it comes is kind of hard. Could we go to the third recommendation, please? Next slide. So, like I said, this is also, we noticed that there were 3 instances in which cash was kept for more than 3 days at the ER department. And when we dug further in this, we found out that there is really no set schedule for Garda to pick up the deposits and deliver it to the treasurer's office. And so we are recommending that they should have scheduled pickup dates. And this actually, I think, does in turn go back to number 2. If they have set days to do the reconciliations, then they will know what are the dates when Garda can actually come and pick them up. Like what we found out that maybe midweek is easier for some of the staff in the ER division, but maybe they can address that with you guys. But I think if they have set dates when they reconcile, then they can have set dates when these items can be picked up. In that case, a lot of things can be eliminated. They could be reconciling timely, and they could be sending things timely to the treasurer's office, which I know was a big concern to the city. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I mentioned about this staffing resources. There appears to be a shortage of admit techs employed by the ER division to handle the significant volume of transactions. So we recommend that the city should internally look and see if they have enough resources there, and if they can maybe move the work around to make sure all employees are being utilized to the best of their capacity. Because a lot of feedback that we got from them was, we just don't have time to do it. So we wanted to bring that to the city's attention. Next slide, please. Number 5, when we looked at the summary slide, I mentioned that there are about 4 findings in which we could say that, we did not find, like the MSW tickets, the cash reconciliations, we weren't able to review them. So we couldn't really say that they weren't done. It's possible they were done, but we never could see them. So a lack of missing documentation does not provide an audit trail for subsequent review or properly documents a trail of the information and related cash. So I think we highly recommend that the department should ensure documents are retained in a timely manner so that, they are kept for any purpose. I mean, even for audits and anything that might be required in the future. Can we go to the next slide, please? Staff training. The audit identified instances of cash reconciliation form being improperly completed or reconciled by the ER division. And we recommend that the department implement training to ensure forms are filled out completely. This was in the case when, somebody was on vacation and the person who was filling in was like maybe counting the cash or doing some verification. They weren't like filling the forms properly. So I think it is just a matter of, whoever just segregating the duties as far as, if people who normally do the work, if they're not there, there should be plans in place to kind of see, who does their work while they're not there. So I think if we could go to the next slide. Just wanted to sort of overall the conclusion of our audit that, we saw that new staff and significant turnover creates challenges for the ER division to operate effectively, efficiently when dealing with cash. The audit identified opportunities for the ER division to improve cash handling operations and to minimize the risk of error in cash handling. And certainly the lack of documentation for certain audit procedures performed did not allow us to quantify the cost of those. The big thing that I would probably take out of this is that ER division has a lot of transactions that go through them on a daily basis. They are doing good things to the best they can, but definitely there are opportunities to improve within their operations. And again, at the end, I also wanted to say that the ER division was very helpful with us. They made time for us whenever any questions that we had. Their director, from director to anybody in the admin tech division, they provided us all the information, and they are very open to improvement suggestions. With that, I just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity, and we would be more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll start with Committee Member Perillo.
Number one, I take a shot at Mr. Yusum Elias. I apologize if I'm messing up your name. Thank you very much for the I see that the time frame that was reviewed from July 1, 2016 to December 31 of 2018. I'm sure that some of these things have been implemented. A couple of points. I appreciate the staff report and a couple of points for the public that's watching this. Me personally, I like to know if I've got beauty marks, but I want to know if I got a black eye first. If there's things that the public needs to know, the good news and the bad news, I want the bad news first. I appreciate what you found out. On a couple of these slides, going back to number 8, there was a question about turnover in the staff. Has there been a determination of why there is a turnover in the staff? I'll just list these questions. On the cash counting, did you determine that you needed, when you had the cash counting, 2 people to count the money, or is there a camera? And along with that, when we have somebody covering for somebody who's on vacation, are there any issues with the union rules about putting somebody in a spot where now they're going to be responsible for the cash? As you mentioned, there's a lot of cash that goes through this organization. The skill set that we have with these employees and the cross training, I appreciate you bringing that up. The issue about the time that the money sat, it was eye-opening to me, and I don't know if you can go back and review the days, but on your audit procedure number 8, when you identified that we have an average of 3 days, but you found 3 instances where the money sat for 26 days on one instance, 52 days on another, and 167 days on another. I would assume that it's much, much better than that. I do agree there needs to be, it shouldn't sit around to get too much temptation. Everybody's human, and temptation is a bad thing that can take advantage of a lot of people. Question on the very first page of your staff report, on the very first paragraph, background and audit objectives. You have a listing on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 line, 5th line down, first paragraph. And you said other divert table material. I'm assuming that means recycling, but I'm not sure. Those are pretty much my questions, except for on the slide where you have, beg your pardon here. On slide, it'd be slide 13, I believe. The key audit results, observations continued, and you have a summary of results, and you have your procedures, 1 through 8, and you have the number of transactions tested. All of them, except for number 8, it's 250 transactions. Why did number 8 only go to 201?
Sure.
Those are my questions.
Okay, so I'll try to answer as I remember. I think first one that you mentioned.
Can you speak up, please?
So the first one relating to the turnover, I mean, I think that's more like an operational issue, but I think what we saw was that a lot of people had either left the ER division while they were there, or they were shorthanded. The reasons why they had left, we did not go into the details of that because that was not the goal of the audit. We were more focusing on the accounting and reconciliation side. The other part, as far as what you were saying relating to the cash handling for more than 3 days, they happen in the three instances that you can see in our report. In those 3 instances, when we did when we looked at the details, there were no differences in what was collected to what was deposited. So that's a good thing. But you're right, they took them long, and the explanation that we found for those were that either somebody was on vacation and they didn't have the time to do that. I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but we found that there were 3 instances in that. And basically, we were doing these procedures after things had happened. So there were some things that we noticed while we were actually doing the procedures. You had mentioned about, if there's a camera. Yes, there's a camera in the room where cash is counted, and they always make sure that, there are 2 people in place when cash is counted. Like I said, when it was actually done for transactions that we were looking at, we looked at initial. So that's the audit trail that I'm looking at. But the live transactions that we did when we did our walkthroughs, there were 2 people present. And yes, there's a camera present as well that we noted that in our walkthroughs as well. I think the biggest part is as far as the delay from the treasurer's office, the ER division to the treasurer's office. That is because there are not set days to reconcile the cash, and they're not pickup days. They call Garda as they feel necessary. So I think that is something that needs to change. And once that changes, all of these things they will probably fix themselves as cash is reconciled timely and it's picked up timely. I am pretty sure these items should be reconciled.
Councilmember, we also have, sorry, Henry, go ahead. But before you start, I just want to let everyone know we have Todd Housley here. So Mr. Housley will also address the committee's questions. But Henry, you first.
Oh, thank you, City Manager. So I just wanted to share, it sounds like the underlying theme when we worked with Todd and his team was that there's really a lack of resources, a lack of staff resources in order to implement all these controls. So what we do see when we take a look at the whole cash handling process is that the design is pretty good. There's two elements to internal controls, right? There's two. There's the design and the implementation. The design looks really good where, Todd and his team saying, for this particular procedure, this has to be done. What we're testing for is the actual implementation. And when you do have a lack of staff resources or a lack of training in completing out various forms, it creates those additional challenges. So the reasons for the vacancies, the reasons for the turnover, that's more of an operational question that Mr. Housley can help answer. But from what we've seen, that translated into what we believe to be longer or delays in these procedures being implemented. So that's why you see an extended amount of time of things taking place. And Councilmember Perallo, to answer that one last question regarding why did we test 201 versus 250, what we did was we selected we selected actual days for these transactions. And there could be an instance in which, let's say a Monday and a Tuesday of the same week was selected, but those two deposits were picked up by Garda on a Friday. So that instance, we selected 2 different days, but it was selected by one transaction. So in our reporting, it's only reported as 1 instead of 2 separate days. So that's why you have a difference of 250 versus 201.
I have one more question. On, again, the slide where we have the key audit report. I'm looking at this one right here.
Okay.
On number 6, daily deposit, it has the highest number of exceptions. It works out to about 45%. Is it just something that was a glitch and it's been taken care of or not? The 113 out of 250. And along with the 250, when you pick the 250, they were just random selections? Those are the 2 questions.
Yes, they were. We randomly selected days we got the total transactions between July 1st, 2016 to December 31st, and we randomly selected the days that we were going to test. And as far as the exception rate, like this is what I mentioned, that there could be information coming from the scalehouse operators into the ER department, but because of the lack of resources, it is not reconciled until a few days later, which is why it could be that a deposit could have come on a Monday and it was reconciled on maybe a Thursday. But it's possible that there's another deposit that came on Monday but didn't make it until next week. So it is just that the flow of information when it comes from the scalehouse operator to the ER division, the time it takes for them to reconcile it because of the lack of resources or any other reason. So those are we were able to find why there were differences, and it basically comes back to timing. Like the city staff or the department staff didn't have the time to reconcile it in a timely manner. And I believe if they say everything that comes on Monday gets reconciled by Wednesday, gets picked up by Garda on Thursday, that would alleviate most of the issues that you will not have these exceptions.
Thank you very much for the explanations. I appreciate it. Thank you both very much. Those are my questions, Mayor.
So, Mr. Mayor,
thank you very much.
Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, before we get your questions, can I have Mr. Housley respond to some of those questions?
Yes, and Mr. City Manager, Just very quickly, I know that the purpose of committees is to be able to get into the weeds, but I see about 90% of what was presented here as administrative, and about 10% might fall in the area of policy, which is the responsibility of the city council. And I really don't have questions. I just would like to hear Mr. Housley and the city manager's response to addressing, the findings of the report, and then I might have a follow-up question, but it's unlikely. Mr. Housley.
Thank you. Testing, making sure you can all hear me first.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, committee members. Councilmember Perello, before I answer your questions, I want to thank the city manager, my public works team, and finance for supporting this. When Alex started with the city, he was at the MRF within a week of his first day and asked me what we could use, and this was one of the items. So I'm very thankful that we're able to address it. Your first question, why is this a high turnover position for customer service reps? We have 3 positions that are entry level in the MRF: customer service rep, maintenance worker trainee, and sorter. Because they're entry level, people tend to get their foot in the door and find other positions within the division, other positions within the city, or outside the city. So it's kind of an industry situation. It's entry-level pay and people just growing in their careers. So we have taken some steps to address that. HR has supported us having a third-party staffing agreement with a pirate staffing, so that these positions that are high turnover, since you started on this audit, we are able, if there's an approved position in recruitment, to bring a person in temporarily to help get us through until we have a full-time person in place. There's also a significant amount of training for a customer service rep before we'll let them handle cash on their own. So that can be a 2 to 4 week process. But we do our best to ensure that we're making the best decisions for protecting the value of whether it's money, resources, recyclables, or otherwise. That first question was, why was it high turnover? One other was was answered by Henry, but if you could restate, Councilman Perello, what your second question was.
I did. Oh, good. You got me there, Todd. But,
I remember. Okay, so
thank you, because
another question was regarding the number of days that the cash was there, and then the third question had to do with vacation time, I believe.
Okay, the timing on the
and stuff like that. Right.
on the issue of timing of why cash was held over. A quick example would be, let's say we've closed end of the day, we've closed out a drawer. That customer service rep has done their reconciliation of that drawer. That goes into a sealed container, which goes into a safe area, and that cannot be opened unless there's double custody in our count area. And there's certain protocols that must be followed before that bag is opened again. Otherwise, we can't assure where the problem was if the totals don't add up. So that contributes to it not having the 2 people, the timing of the pickups. Again, it goes back to staffing. So that we have to make a value judgment. We don't want to open that bag until 2 people are there. Otherwise, we're opening up a whole other can of worms. Hopefully that explains why there is a delay at times. It's not because we're not processing the cash on site. It's more timing and then the staff available to do things by protocol.
I appreciate that, Mr. Housley. This I do recall now. Is there an issue with respect to when someone goes on vacation and someone fills in, that there are specific duties, that there may be specific union rules or something that somebody's not supposed to count the money because that's not in the job descriptions? Does that play into this?
It does play into it. However, there are backup staff trained. So we have customer service reps, and then again, you have the segregation of incompatible duties. So you don't want a customer service rep counting their own drawer 3 days later and reconciling. So we would have a person on the, I call it the ER finance team, and that would be the staff that that does take care of all of the issues that we're looking at here today. They are trained to backfill, but then that slows down what they're doing, and it's a chain reaction through the organization. So there's no union issues. It's within the job descriptions, but we can't pull somebody in from another part of the operation to do a reconciliation count if they're not trained to do it. So we have a limited amount of people that we can go to do that reconciliation. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, and I appreciate your answers. Thank you very much, Mr. Housley. Thank you, City Manager.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'd like
yes.
to point out one more item, and so that
Yes.
is, so if you look at the actual audit report itself, there's a 7th recommendation that was redacted, and it has to do with the safety issue that the police chief and I both concur that we would not want to publish this for the public. I want to assure you that staff fully agrees with that recommendation, and we are working to remedy that, and it's something that we can certainly discuss in closed session in the future. But that's why recommendation 7 is redacted, is for the safety of the staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. City Manager, I think the most important, and Committee Member Perillo, and Mr. Housley, I think the most important thing that I get from this report is that there's not fraud. And quite frankly, the purpose of these audits and cash audits, which have the potential for abuse, is that if there is individuals that are absconding with money, and that appears not to be the case, that is the message to the public. Everything else here, I think, is highly detailed administrative information, which again is important. But I think from a policy standpoint, this is about management, and it's about effectively managing the handling of cash and making sure that the safeguards are in place and the personnel is in place, that these policies and the plan, as the auditor noted, that the plan is actually executed, that the plan is actually followed. And so I want to thank the auditor, and I want to thank Mr. Housley and those that are going to implement this plan, and I'm sure this will come back to the committee for a more careful follow-up on, or a careful follow-up on implementing the recommendations of the auditor. So thank you very much, and this doesn't require that it even be forwarded to the City Council, so we want to thank the auditor for that. And we'll go to item 2 under the Finance Department. Subject, presentation of single audit report and update of corrective action plan. The recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee receive a single audit report from the audit of Edie & Payne, or firm of Edie & Payne, an update on the corrective action plan, otherwise known as from staff, and give authorization to forward both presentations to the City Council. And I don't know, Mr. City Manager, is it Mr. Riper that we start with, or with you?
Mr. Riper is here.
Mr. Riper.
Thank you, Mayor, Committee Member Perillo. The first presentation will be given by Edie & Payne's Eden Casareno. That's presenting the single audit. And the second presentation will be given by Christine Williams, Senior Manager of Internal Controls in the Finance Department, who will present the corrective action plan update. Eden?
Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Kevin. So it's our pleasure to present to you today the single audit report for City of Oxnard for fiscal year June 30, 2019. With me today are couple of our young folks at the firm. Hong Nguyen, who is our youngest partner in the firm, and Mary Macshin, our youngest manager. Both of them have participated and contributed a lot to the single audit that we have done for the city for this fiscal year. Next slide, please. So these are the topics that we will cover, and please feel free to ask any questions at the end of our presentation. Next slide. So the single audit report was issued on February 14, 2020, and it was submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse on March 16, 2020. That is like 2 weeks before it was due, and Kevin and I are really excited about that. It was submitted along with the CAFR and the city's corrective action plan. Those three documents are what's called the single audit package. Was accepted by the Federal Audit Clearinghouse on the same day. Once it's accepted, it becomes available to federal agencies that provide grants to the city, and it also becomes available to the state and county agencies that provide pass-through funds to the city. Next slide, please. As you know, the single audit is conducted when the city spends $750,000 or more in federal grants. In fiscal year 2019, the total expenditures by the city amounted to $5.8 million. There were a total of 17 programs from 8 federal agencies. The most grants come from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the Department of Transportation. Of the 17 programs, 2 programs actually qualified as major programs. They are the CDBG, or the Community Development Block Grants, and Home Investment Partnership Program, or what's commonly known as HOME. Both are HUD grants, and major programs are the ones that we test during the single audit. So federal expenditures of $5.8 million represent only 3% of the city's total expenditures for 2019. However, in this 2020 and 2021, there is a possibility that that could increase by a lot, especially since the federal government has expanded many of the programs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this becomes a really good source of income for the city, or the city can tap to offset any loss of revenues during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So single audit report contains a schedule of findings and question costs that are related to both the financial audit as well as the compliance audit, or the single audit. The findings reported by us when we find a deficiency in internal control over financial reporting, or an internal control deficiency over compliance, or if we find any instances of non-compliance or opportunities for best practices. So those are the 4 categories of findings that we will report to you, year by year. As I probably know by now, material weakness in internal control is the worst category because it means that there is a reasonable possibility that material misstatements or material non-compliance will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. So as I said, that is a reasonable possibility. That doesn't mean that there is a material misstatement. Rather than, when we find a material weakness, we actually have to do a lot more testing in order to make sure or be assured that no material misstatements or material non-compliance exist. A significant deficiency is less severe than a material weakness, yet it is important enough to merit your attention. That is why we report on it. Non-compliance is pretty self-explanatory. When there is a compliance requirement and the city does not comply, then that is reported to you. So the schedule of findings and question costs contains both current and prior year findings. Christine will be presenting to you a status of the prior year findings. But first, Hong is going to discuss the current year findings. So if you can go to the next slide, please, and Hong, you can take over. Are you there, Hong?
You might need to unmute.
She was telling me earlier. She was telling me earlier that she's encountering mic problems. So maybe I should just, continue.
Please.
Okay. So let me just go to the report and make sure that I am providing you the right information here. So for our major federal programs, we had found a non-compliance in the U.S. Department of Justice grant, which is called the Equitable Sharing Program. So the Equitable Sharing Program was not really a major program, but when we were looking at the schedule of expenditures and federal awards, we noted that it was overstated by a certain amount. I don't have the exact figures. So what it was is that the city, the person who was preparing the CFA reported both the expenditures as well as the revenues that were received. So we had proposed a correction for that. So that one is a non-compliance issue, not an internal control issue. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is a summary of the findings related to the financial statements, total findings of 10. As you can see, there's no material weakness identified, which is great. This is the first year that we haven't found any material weakness. And I credit the city finance department, city management for doing their best for their efforts to not have a material weakness. We only have 5 significant deficiencies, and 5 of those 10 findings were best practice recommendations. So the report was already provided to you. If you have any additional questions on any of these findings, I'd be glad to answer any questions. In the meantime, I think because we're running out of time here, I'm going to turn over to Christine.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Michelle. So good morning. I'm Christine Williams, Senior Manager of Internal Controls of the Finance Department. If you could advance the slide, Michelle. Today's agenda, I'll be covering the status of the Correction Action Plan, the Finance Department's continued progress and additional resources provided, and then finally conclude with any questions that you have. If you could advance, Michelle. So the Finance Department every 6 months reports on the Corrective Action Plan, or also known as the CAP, to the committee and the council. So I'd like to recap of what our CAP status definitions mean. We have 6 categories. Complete means the auditors have tested and determined that the corrective action for the finding has been effectively implemented. To be tested means policies and procedures and training, if applicable, and the corrective action is ready for the auditors to test during the next audit cycle or single audit. P&P draft means policies and procedures are drafted but not yet approved and or training has not been provided. In progress means staff has taken implementation but has not yet drafted any policies or procedures or completed any training if applicable. Not started is self-explanatory, and rejected or no longer required means that staff has provided the auditors with additional information and the auditors have determined that the corrective action is no longer required. We could go to the next slide. So this slide represents the finding status from 2015 to 2018, of which we reported to you as of October 2019. If I could just kind of direct you to the right column there, the total column on the slide, a little bit more than halfway down, you'll find that we reported out that we had total findings of 172 findings. We do have findings that repeat year after year. So the total of those findings were 22. And then what we're most interested in is getting the total unique findings after we take away those repeat findings, which came to a total of 150 total unique findings. If you kind of go up on the far right, back up to the top, out of those 115 unique findings, we completed 86. And then a little bit more down the same column, passed or no longer required, were 7. So at the very bottom there of the total is 57 total unresolved unique findings. Of those 57, 23 are unresolved related to material weaknesses, 22 for significant deficiencies, 4 for non-compliance, which are usually in the grant area, and then recommended best practices were 8. If you could advance to the next slide. So we just completed our single audit report, as Eden mentioned, for June 30th, 2019, of which 11 additional findings came out, and 3 of those were repeat findings. So if we go to that far right-hand column again, and we go down to the total findings, it has now increased to 183 findings. Just below that are repeat findings, where we added an additional 3. So now we have 25 repeat findings. And that leaves us with a total unique findings of 158. Then if you go back up to the top of that total column, you'll see we completed 107. And then we had passed or no longer required of 13. And then to the very bottom of the chart there are now our total unresolved unique findings are 53. Out of those 53 findings, 21 are related to material weaknesses, 20 are for significant deficiencies, 1 is for non-compliance, and 11 are recommended best practices. You could advance to the next slide, Michelle. Thank you. This shows you that what progress the finance department, this chart shows you what we've completed over the last 2 fiscal years for all the unresolved findings by category. So as you can see, when we first, our status updates to you the first 2 times, we weren't able to make significant progress. However, over our last, this update and our last update, we've been able to make significant progress. We went from 35 unresolved material weaknesses down to 23 and now down to 21. On significant deficiencies, you can see they grew a little bit as of our first 2 updates. However, we were able again to significantly decrease that number from 39 down to 22, down to 20 significant deficiencies. So we're very happy that we were able to significantly reduce those key areas. In non-compliance, we're down to 1 unresolved finding. In best practices, you can see we have increased on recommended best practices there. And then you can see at the very bottom of this chart, our total findings of where we went as of our last 4 status updates to you. We had total unresolved findings of 80, sorry, Mike, hard to see here on my screen, 81. We increased a little bit to 87 and then significantly decreased down to 57 and then down to 53. If you could advance the slide, Michelle. So what are our next steps? The industry standard is for local governments to adopt an internal control integrated framework, referred to as ICIF. This is basically to develop a system to cover 3 main categories of internal control objectives. Those 3 categories are in the areas of operations, reporting, and compliance. The city plans to adopt ICIF, implementing policies that will address financial reporting control risks. In addition, the finance department is currently working on more detailed control documentation, and which will continue over the course of the next year. Also, I'd like to recap where the finance department received full-time additional equivalents in our 2020 budget. And the one area that I really want to focus on here is my actual new role as internal control of senior manager of internal control, which my role is dedicated to implementing and maintaining the ICIF, facilitating resolution of remaining audit findings, driving continuous process improvement to minimize future findings for the city, and then also providing subject matter expertise on the ERP implementation. If you could advance. Recent developments. So we completed our comprehensive annual financial report on time, and then as Eden alluded to earlier, and I'm very happy to report, we were able to complete our single audit report 2 weeks earlier, and then even before the Federal Audit Clearinghouse had delayed the due date by 6 months. In addition, we have a new ERP system was approved by the City Council in October 2019. This is important for internal controls because it'll help automate our controls. You could advance to the next slide. And then finally, we'll conclude with the recommendation that the committee receive this update and give authorization for staff to present the item to council. You could advance to the next slide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that report, Committee Member Perillo.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. Ms. Cresarino identified on her Edie and Payne slide number 4 with current year findings, major federal programs. It says U.S. Department of Justice, and there was 1 in non-compliance. And I believe I understood her to say that usually has to do with grants. And I see that the non-compliance has, the numbers have come down, but in the area where there's a problem with grants, is that something that we have, how do we, from your seat, how do you go about making sure that doesn't happen again?
Yes, sir. We've been actually over the last couple of years really beefing up our different processes for grants, making sure that staff is getting training, attending any classes or any industry standards that we have. So we're actively always improving staff to make sure that they're up to date on the latest compliance issues that the auditors bring to our attention, and make sure that we're training and then cross-training staff to make sure that everybody's aware of the compliance issues that need to be covered, and to make sure that we're always in compliance with any grant reporting requirements.
Okay, thank you. On this particular one, it says U.S. Department of Justice. Do we know where the grant is? Is it a housing grant, or is it a public safety or public works?
Eden, I don't recall on that one.
Okay. Ideally, when the various charts and showing again, I appreciate the report. I definitely appreciate you guys numbering the slide presentation too. When the numbers have come down and they've gotten better, ideally we're looking for zeros in any of the material weakness, significant, non-compliance, best practices. What area, if there were numbers, would be least worrisome for you? Is it material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, non-compliance, and best practices?
Well, best practices would be the least area of concern because those are guidelines and recommendations by industry standards. So those that are been proven to be most effective, those are the least concern that we have.
Okay, thank you. And one last one. On slide 3, we have the PNP draft and its policy and procedures. Are these policy and procedures that the council approves, or is it policy and procedures that the city management has?
Yeah, actually, as we've been working on these findings over the last couple of years, we actually did have them approved by our CFO, and they were actually taken, I believe, to the committee and council for approval. Now, when we adopt the internal control integrated framework, those of course will go to council. There will be several implementing policies as well. Those will all be going to council. And then sometimes we may do policies that are just administrative or internal. So we have both types of policies that we will be implementing.
Thank you very much. Eden and Ms. Williams, thank you very much for the presentation. That's all my questions.
Eden, do you or your team have any comments to make regarding Councilmember Perello's questions?
Yes. Regarding his question on the Department of Justice, so that finding was the amount that was reported in the schedule of expenditures for federal awards relating to equitable sharing program. That is a grant that is provided by the Department of Justice. It included approximately $180,000 that were received, but not really spent yet. So the criteria is that it has to have been spent by the city in order for it to be included in the CFA. So the staff member who was not, who prepared it was not aware of that requirement. So we suggested additional training, but that error had been corrected in the CFA that you received.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any questions?
Sorry about that, Mr. City Manager. I had my microphone muted. I want to thank the auditor for the report. I want to thank them also for the progress that they've made. And I'd like to ask both the city manager and Mr. Riper about the issue that preceded this one, which is always an issue of capacity, and whether we are trying to contextualize how we're meeting the capacity issue in this regard, and how does the staff capacity to address these findings?
Mayor, this is Kevin. I'll handle that one.
Okay.
Before the public health emergency, I was much more optimistic.
Okay.
Depending on how long that goes and what kind of chaos it throws the city's finances and accounting and budgeting into, it's impossible to say at this point.
I see.
Absent that, the senior manager internal controls position that Ms. Williams is filling, that she alluded to, that City Council approved in the 1920 budget, and the new financial analyst position for financial reporting and cost allocation and indirect cost plans, had us on a really good course. But the future for the finance department, just as for everybody else, is very uncertain at the current moment.
I see. And Mr. Riper, could you address, and certainly that's, a very practical explanation about, given the circumstances, it makes a lot of sense. So maybe just from a capacity issue, it just kind of helps me in my mind that your department, is it right now, and I'm not asking for an exact figure, are we at 80% of capacity? Are we at 75%? What's your assessment about where we are and how hopefully post COVID-19 we're going to be able to address that gap?
Well, we're operating 110% of capacity.
Okay. I like that.
But in terms of bodies, I think, again, if COVID-19 hadn't happened, within several years, I think we would have gotten all of those material weakness and significant deficiency numbers, maybe not all the way to zero, but down to low single digits.
Okay.
So the capacity is there if the outside world cooperates. For example, before COVID-19, the finance department was not going to ask the city manager or the city council for any more FTEs. We got our 2 last year.
I see.
In addition to that, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
because we were able to add 2 positions there, we also are in serious need for the ERP transition. So bringing the new global software system online is crucial to our success going forward, and we remain focused on getting that done.
I really appreciate that, Mr. City Manager. Could you, and that's very relevant to bring that in, and not to get too off into the ERP, but where are we with the ERP? And I know it was it's somewhere like about 1.5 years about the implementation. Is that where we are right now with the ERP?
We're at the very early stages, and the 1.5 years is just for the phase 1. So in the life of it, it's going to be a 5-year process, as a reminder. But the reason I bring that up is related to your question about capacity. A big challenge for us with regard to capacity is the fact that the system that we're currently in is somewhat antiquated for our needs, and we're struggling with so much paperwork. And this pandemic has also revealed how those weaknesses are amplified right now. I would like to make sure, though, that the committee gets back to Edie and Payne's presentation on the CAFR to make sure if you have any questions regarding the first presentation. I want to make sure those are asked and answered while we have Eden and her team on the conference call.
That was my only question, is about staff's capacity to address the findings. Committee Member Perello, do you have any final questions?
I had asked the question about the Department of Justice, but Mr. City Manager, if there's something that you think that the mayor and I may be overlooking, I'm all ears to hear what further question you may ask.
No, I don't have any questions. I'm actually quite pleased at the steadiness, albeit slow, but very steady and concrete progress. So thank you very much.
And thank you very much. I want to thank once again the auditors and Mr. Riper and the finance department for considering the circumstances, really making a significant amount of progress. And very optimistic, Mr. City Manager and Mr. Riper, that, and also Committee Member Perello, that we're going to be able to address these capacity issues sooner rather than later. So I'm an optimist, and I really want to thank all of you for the excellent report and the progress that has been made over this past year. So
I'd like to make a comment, Mayor.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Number one, again, thank you very much. The auditors, Ms. Quesareno, there have been times in the past when these have been a little more contentious. This is a nice presentation. Ms. Williams too. Things are getting better. Sometimes you have to stand back to realize things are getting better. So enough on that. But I want to address Mr. Riper. Mayor, we may have missed, and I want the public to be really flat, understand plain English. When we have a gentleman telling us that the staff is operating at 110%, just suppose you were driving your car at maximum speed all the time. The life expectancy of that car is not going to be very good. We have to make sure that we take care of our staff, and they have done a tremendous job. And the improvements in the finance department, Mayor, you well know, as I do, when I first got on this council, there were a lot of things, and they've been addressed. The compliments to go to the finance department, all the people handling the money, all the different departments. We need to say thank you and understand you can't burn up the motor by just keep hammering it, because eventually things will break. And Mr. Riper, thank you very much for you and your staff. Mr. Newen for bringing him on board, and Mayor for the presentation. This is one of the, it's not ideal, but it is still one of the best presentations we have. Things are getting better, ladies and gentlemen. Things are getting better. And it has a lot to do with the staff that we got working and the diligence and everything else that they're doing. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee refer this corrective action plan update, single audit report, corrective action plan update to the City Council. What's the pleasure of the committee?
I move the recommendation.
And I'll second that. The roll call, please, Madam City Clerk.
Member Perrello,
Yes.
Chair Flynn.
Aye.
The motion carries 2-0.
Okay, thank you. And the last item is item E on the agenda, items for future agendas. Committee Member Perrello, do you have any future items for, or do you have any items for future agendas?
It may be a little bit off, but on the finance and governance, it gets into potentially insurance and potential litigation. I've received comments from, recently, a letter from Mr., I believe his name is Weingard, with respect to the city's approval of projects and the expectation of ocean sea level rise and why certain things are being done and approved along the coast. My understanding is that these approvals have been approved some years in the past, and the approvals and the property go with rights, legal rights. I'd like to have some of those things addressed, because I know that the council does not want to put the city in a jeopardy spot moving forward because of some action we take today. And that's how we would work that into some sort of a governance and finance thing, because I believe the insurance is a big part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. We can bring an update about that.
Very well. Okay, thank you. And I have no items for future agendas, and so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eden and team. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.